So after that, I've been invited to talk about parenting, and really congratulations, Brooke, on such an initiative. It's really positive and affirming for me when I see a community really take steps towards moving, or advancing their parenting for the benefit of the communities that that you live in. Parenting has been a passionate area for me for quite a long time. Actually, I've been doing parenting programs for probably over 15 years, my career started in the Islamic schools actually. So a lot of my work and history is really child and family centred. So today we're going to have a look at some of the most beneficial parenting strategies for me, and I'm very aware that this is only 1 hour, and I usually run parenting programs that run across 6 weeks. So inshallah, if there's any questions that come to your mind later, I don't get through it, and I also might skip through some of my slides just in terms of time. And if you have any burning question, as much as we have 10 minutes at the end, which isn't much, if you do have a burning question, please raise your hand. I'm very happy to answer that throughout. And my workshops are usually fairly interactive, so I want you to reflect a little bit on your own parenting. And so if you aren't sitting with anyone, maybe sit with someone so you can have a discussion, because I'm sure what you'll find is a lot of the issues that are common to yourself are very common to the parent sitting next to you. So we're going to have to start off with a bit of a disclaimer. So before we start, in life we all do the best we can at any given moment. The point of learning something new about parenting is not to blame ourselves, but to give ourselves direction and inspiration to make things better. So I want to acknowledge that in the room, as much as I might have studied about parenting, collectively the wisdom of parenting in the room is enormous. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit as parents that we are doing a good job. And sometimes all it is a matter of is just tweaking what we're doing to get the better outcome that we want. Sometimes if we think that we run into a problem with our children, we may not think that we are a good enough parent, or we might blame the child for the problem. We're the perfect parent, you're the problem. In fact, when I get parents bringing their children to me who have behaviour problems or emotional issues in my clinic, it's often there's a gap in the parent's parenting. There isn't a gap in the child. There's a gap in the parent's parenting. So you are the most influential person in your child's life or adolescent's life, and it really does come down by taking responsibility for that in terms of owning your parenting role. If I support parents to do their parenting in a slightly different way, that will have a huge ramification for your child in a good way, okay? Rather than fixing the child. So parents will bring their child and say, fix the child, and they'll say, okay, let me look at you first. Let me help you and support you in your parenting. Because the truth is, even if I work with the problem child for 1 hour, it's only going to have this much benefit, okay, depending on the issue. But if I work with the parent for 1 hour, that parent is then with the child for many, many hours during the week, and so your impact is much greater. So I truly believe in investing in parents, and then the problems with your child, inshallah, will disappear. I really like this analogy. For a parent, you're like the oak tree that the child runs into over and over again until she realises that the tree is stronger than she is and walks around it next time. Okay? That's what children do. They run into us a lot, okay, with not behaving in the way that we would prefer them to behave. But you have to be the strong one that stands there until the child learns to move around you. What we see now in these days is the parent moving around the child as if the child is the tree. And that's not the way it should be. So today I'm going to look at successful families, using a strengths approach to understanding and developing the potential in your child, which is really important. Understanding how you and your marriage shapes your child's character, I might touch on that. How to shape respectful and responsible citizens of the world. Using good conversations with your teen or child to solve problems, and at the end hopefully we'll have some questions and some discussion. So what makes you a good parent? Think about it. What already makes you a good parent? If you can think you bring up in your mind a role model for you, even in the community, of who you think has raised fantastic children, what do you think some of their characteristics are? Patience.
More like a friend.
Being a friend, yes. Communication, yes. Constantly talking to our children and actually having enough time. I read this great quote yesterday, and it said, if we halved the money we spent on our children and doubled the time that we spent with them, we'll get the child that we want. Isn't that interesting? Halve the money, double the time, and you'll get the child you want. So just think about what makes a good parent, and I'm delighted you've come here today just to sit there and reflect on your parenting, which is fantastic. And hopefully throughout the course of the hour, you'll be coming to mind some of the things that you are doing. Because really sometimes our confidence can be undermined by our children. Sometimes it only takes a young child or a teenager to say, "You're a mean mummy. I don't like you." In anger, and then some people will take that to heart. But truly that's just the child being a little bit manipulative and trying to get what they want, and they love you. So your role as a parent is all of that. This is, from birth. We set the boundaries for the children, we teach them how to do emotion, we teach them, and this is an interesting point, we teach our children how to do emotion. We show them not just how to tie their shoelaces, but also how to experience happiness and sadness and how much they worry. We model it and they copy. Okay. But we have to think, what do we want for our children? What's the end goal? What happens with parenting is often we get stuck in and focused on the day-to-day, the routine. And then we worry too much if the child hasn't hung up their bag after school. But we don't worry as much as whether they're developing the characteristic of honesty and reliability and responsibility. And then all of a sudden that child turns into the 19-year-old who comes home with a speeding fine. That's what happens. In the blink of an eye, our children go to turn into young adults. And now our parenting really comes to the fore, the outcome, in the good and the bad. Or our children do really well in their VCE, and then you're like, thank God, whatever we did paid off. Okay. So there's so much responsibility on our shoulders, and we really do need as many tools as we can. So it's important to think about, when you can take a moment to think that how we envision our own parenting will shape your child's future. If you think that generally you're a good parent, then you probably are. You probably are. Even if your child is misbehaving, doesn't mean you're a bad parent. The child is, that's what they do. Okay, they test the boundaries, that's what they do. So what I want you to think of is try and get out of sometimes the day-to-day parenting and just step back for a moment and think, what is it that you want for your children in the future? Because you're creating the adult in the future, but they're not there yet. And once you do that, sometimes that'll help you to relieve some of that pressure you put on yourselves to make sure that your children are doing every single thing. Because at the end of the day, it's who they are that matters, not what they become, but who they are. Because that will shape what they become, and they will define that, and it's already written for them. It's already covered. So let's think about us for a minute. Remember, we too are products of our own parents' parenting of us, or maybe our grandparents or aunts and uncles stepped up and took up that role. So we are a product of our own parents' parenting. And our family of origin 100% shape how we parent. 100% shape how we parent. So the influence of our parents' parenting, they set up the model, the template for how we do it, because none of you, I'm assuming, have ever had or gone to school and learned how to become a mum or a dad. It's actually universally not done, except if you come to a parenting program and then step back and look at what you're doing to do it better. And when you know if that was a business, that some of us will just, step up into business because we've watched our parents do it and we don't go to school to be trained in it. But same with the business, often with parenting, we're in the family and we're just managing the day-to-day. We often don't step up as like what a manager does. It has a look over the business and manages and grows the business. And analyses what's happening. As parents, we often don't do that because we're too busy getting them to school and have you done your homework and are you dressed time and stop fighting with your brother, etc. So, and we don't step back and have a look and go, oh, hang on a minute, what am I doing? Like, what impact is my parenting having on my family? But if we did every now and again, our family will drive forward. So when it comes to our parenting, we often, whether we like it or not, pick up things from our parents, consciously and unconsciously. And it's across this little matrix. And I'll be making this PowerPoint available to far later so it can be circulated. So if there's a way for you to put your email address on it and you want to access this to have a think about it later, that'd be great. For time, we don't have time to do it now. But our parenting consists of 4 different categories, okay? And it's all reflective to our family of origin. One is we see something that our parents did when we were a kid. We like it, but we don't do it. Okay? They could have been fantastic savers. They might have been really good at saving money. But for whatever reason, a weakness in us, we're not as good saver as them. Okay? So there's something about their parenting we love or we like, but we don't do it. Okay? Now the other area is we liked what they did and we copy it. We're doing it too. Okay? So it might have been that that once dinner is set, everyone comes to the table, or whatever it is, and everyone eats together, and we model that, and we think that's the way to do it, and we like it, and we repeat the behaviour. Okay. Another area is we dislike something that our parents did when we were kids, okay, but we find that we're doing it. That thing that we grew up going, oh, I swear I'll never do that like my mum or dad did, and then you go, oh, I am doing it. And you do repeat behaviour. And that column often comes up when we're stressed. Because when we're stressed, we default back to what our parents showed us when they were stressed. And without consciously learning a new strategy, we just repeat it, even if we don't like it. And you're like, darn, I swore I'll never do that, and then you repeat it. It's because you haven't come up with another strategy. Except if you write down what you don't like you're doing, and then go and find a different strategy. And the other area is there's something in our parents' parenting that we didn't like what they did, and we make a very conscious decision not to do it, and we don't do it. Okay? So that's what makes up our parenting. So when we step back, we can really strategically plan our parenting if you give yourself a little bit of time. So I'm going to show you what some research-based qualities are of successful families, and hopefully it'll address some of the reasons that you came here today. So the research says that in terms of family atmosphere, and the reason I'm focusing on flourishing families is because I want you to go, yes, we do that, or we do a bit of that, and we should do more of that, because that's what's going to help your whole family to be successful. So an optimistic attitude. I think this is really important within Muslim communities, is because often, some of the oppression that occurs is within our own minds. We can be the worst oppressors of ourselves because of our own negativity. And let's face it, Muslims worldwide have a lot of different pressures on them. But despite that, we have to try and prevail and find the bright side, the optimistic side to whatever's happening, and to teach our children how to see that. Otherwise, what we do is we can become depressed. We depress ourselves, okay? We push ourselves down with our own thinking. And thinking is what you model in your day-to-day interactions with your children. You model thinking, you model your beliefs about the world, about success, about happiness. You model it. Okay? Even in small, really, small trials and tribulations, we model our, whether we model patience and perseverance, or we model frustration and intolerance or negativity. And you've got to be careful, because that all comes down to the parents. There's an emotion called angst. Angst is a combination of anger and anxiety. Anger and anxiety. Okay? So when we're uncertain in a particular situation, or someone annoys us, often we feel angst. And there's an analogy where the dad goes to work and his boss is expressing some negative emotion. Then that emotion travels down to the dad comes home, that emotion travels down and gets passed on to the wife then travels that down and passes it on to the kids, and one of the kids goes and kicks the cat. Okay, it's a negative energy, and it just flows here, and it goes down to the weakest link. And so we've got to be mindful of what we're doing with emotion, our negative emotions. Alternatively, it's the optimistic attitude that prevails. And it's not to say that we should never model negative emotions to children, because you're a human and you're going to experience frustration and disappointment and anger, etc. But it's how you're expressing it, because they are just copying. Even if we don't want them to learn what we're teaching, they're going to learn it anyway. Family members seek to enhance the well-being of each other. I think well-being is it's a very old concept. Okay, it's even mentioned in Quran around the losing of, one of the biggest blessings you can use is your health and well-being. Okay. So family members need to seek to reassure each other and to check in with each other to make sure everyone's going okay. Respect is shown for subjective opinions. I think this is a very interesting concept. That people, even young people, can have a different opinion to their parents, and if respect gets shown to them, it doesn't mean that the child will hold on to that opinion. In fact, if you polarize, rebellion comes when there's two sides. So I often hear parents going, my child is rebellious. They're saying the opposite of what I want them to think or believe. They're doing the opposite of what I want them to do. So if you hold firmly to one side, the child will go to the other coin and hold the other side. It's not to say you let go of your view, but it depends on how you're expressing the view. If you give the child the freedom, a small amount of freedom to hold the view, but to understand you're still holding yours, they will be more flexible in their view and they might let go of it. Because remember, you're the oak tree. You're the oak tree, but it depends on how you're expressing the child. At the end of the day, we do want them to have our own opinion. I often say to parents, we create the child to be independent, but we don't like when their independence comes at us. Okay? We create their child to stand up to other people and to be strong and determined in their belief, but we don't like when that characteristic comes at us as a parent. It's seen as disrespectful. So it's very interesting. Approaches to problems, resourcefulness, making something big out of something very little. Brainstorming. Okay. Not just coming in and solving your children's problems for you, but actually allowing them to come in and say, okay, let's sit down and let's brainstorm some ideas, even if they're really silly ideas, or they're not common sense, which that's often happens with children. Okay, they're not pragmatic. But just brainstorm. So teach them how to solve their own problems. Shared decision making, which is really interesting because in many cultures there's a hierarchical nature to a family. And so sometimes decision making is not shared, but then we often don't teach our children then how to make decisions, and then we wonder why they're irresponsible. You taught them to be. Articulation of goals and steps rather than getting stuck in the disagreement. Just different approaches to problems. A family communication skills. Individuals speak clearly. It comes up over and over again, whether it's between a husband and wife or parents and children, that you're going to stand, here's what I heard, what you said. Yeah, or here's what I said, what you heard. Okay. Our brains tick over so quickly with thinking that often even between a husband and a wife, we can say something but it gets heard in a completely different way. So just clarifying, particularly when arguments strike, understand that often it's just a misunderstanding of what you're telling yourself in your head is not what your spouse said, or it's not what your child's actually said. But we add in because we think we know them, or we think we mind read what they meant, not what they said. So clarify what's being said, and then you'll have less conflict. And then take responsibility. There's a concept. The communicator has to take responsibility for what gets communicated, rather than blaming the person for misunderstanding you. And there's a famous idea: speak to the other person to their understanding, in accordance with their understanding. Speak to the other person in accordance with their understanding. So when we're talking to children, we forget, because particularly as teenagers, because they can speak so fluently and at such a level, we forget that we make this unconscious assumption that they should be able to understand what we're talking about. And often they don't, because they may have only had 14 years experience on the earth. And remember, they're still learners. But we just forget, because it's very hard to switch off our adult and to go down to the 14-year-old mind or the 8-year-old mind. And our children are so savvy now. Like my daughter, she's 3.5. This morning before I left, she said, I put Peppa Pig on my Facebook. She doesn't have Facebook. She's 3.5. That's what she said. She goes, I put Peppa Pig on my Facebook. So she's heard her older sister and probably myself and my husband talk about Facebook, and she loves Peppa Pig, and so she's putting Peppa Pig on her Facebook, on her little play phone. They pick up things. So they, even as a 3 and 4-year-old, they can speak at such a level, but then we treat them at that level, but they're not at that level. They've only got a small amount of experience on the earth. There's a really important question that I asked to a family a very long time ago. I said, who are having difficulties between their teenage son and the parents. And I said, is your family fun? Is it fun? Is it fun to be in your family? And most parents say, not really. Not really. And then we wonder why the child doesn't really want to be at home and he wants to be with his friends all the time. Why? Fun. But if you make your family fun, so if there's social and emotional benefits to being in your family, then you will always have your children by your side. Remember that. If there's social and emotional benefits for your teenager, being in your family, or your community for that matter, they'll be by your side. Bluntly, if your family gets boring, you know where your teenager's going to be. An emotional bank account. The concept of an emotional bank account is really important when it comes to not only spouses but also families. The emotional bank account is an imaginary bank account where there's a reciprocity. So between a husband and wife, it could be, would you like a cup of tea? Yes, that'd be fantastic. Okay. Would you like to go out for dinner? Yes, that'd be fantastic. There's a reciprocity. There's a giving, a topping up of each other's emotional bank account. If you imagine a beacon or a cup, if the emotional bank account for all family members is relatively high, the family is harmonious, in the same way that your bank account is harmonious when there's money in it. But sometimes between family members, and unfortunately with teenagers, there's no other time in their development where teenagers will withdraw from your emotional bank account. They will want. They want your time, they want your attention, they want your money. Okay? They will test your patience and deplete, withdraw, until actually you don't feel very good about them anymore. Okay? You're not really feeling it with your teenager because they're so testing. It's because the emotional bank account is bordering on empty. Yours, they feel pretty good, and then they're wondering why you get angry all the time. Okay? Adolescents, by definition, are fairly narcissistic. It's what's happening in their brain. Yes, there's always exceptions to the rule because someone has a characteristic of empathy and caring, and they're the exception, to the rule. But generally speaking, if we look at the brain of an adolescent, they are narcissistic, in other words, selfish. They grow out of it. But you've got to model something different and have patience, as the sister said, but not too much. Okay? And I'll talk about boundaries in the second half of my talk. Patience can turn into something nasty, which looks like passiveness. Okay? If we know what passiveness, it means being walked all over and being taken advantage of. So if we're too patient, that's what happens. It flips to the vulnerability. So patience is not always what we need, although it's needed sometimes. Okay, I mentioned playtime, generation of positive energy, having fun, and a commitment to family time. Like I said, half the money, double the time. Half the money, double the time. Okay. Family structure. This is really important. One of the biggest, if you want to damage a child, do this. Have one parent undermine the other parent in front of the child. Okay, I'll give you an example. Daddy, can I have my third piece of chocolate cake? Mum's going. And Dad goes, yeah, sure. Or the other way around. Okay. And kids are artful manipulators. They love you, but they like to get what they want. And they learn the tricks very early on of who to go to ask for stuff. Okay. But if you undermine each other in front of each other, and kids will do it in different ways, they'll go to whoever's going to say yes in front of everyone, or they'll do it, or they'll go, dad's in the bedroom, mum's in the lounge room, and they're just going to go and ask for whatever they want. Whoever they think is going to say yes, they're going to go to that parent first. If you undermine each other, you undermine your couple alliance, your children will use it against you to get what they want. And what they want is not always what they need. What they need often is to hear no more often. So think about it. I'm not saying be the no parent and say no to everything. I don't agree with that. But that's usually not our problem, and we're seeing this because of the consequences of what we see in society, is that people don't have enough self-control, and they don't have emotional regulation, and they don't take responsibility. So these are the 3 consequences for a parent who doesn't say no enough. Is that really clear? So people who get angry too easily, they're not in control of themselves. People who spend too much money, they're not in control of themselves. People who are overweight, they're not in control of themselves. They're not saying no to ourselves. And I'll go into this really important area. So where possible, and sometimes there's a misunderstanding. And this happens even in my family too, even between 2 parents. There can be misunderstanding in terms of my 6-year-old yesterday came and said, the day before, he said to my husband and I was sitting next to each other on a couch, he asked my husband for a glass of milk. I didn't hear what he said because he mumbled. And my husband went, no. And then I went, what do you want? And he goes, milk. And I go, yeah, go get it. And then my husband looked at me like, I just said no. You said yes. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that, but misunderstanding, classic example. Okay? So that's where you've got to, but it's where possible that you have this alliance and you talk about that nothing comes between you and the couple, you and your partner. Because at the end of the day, your children leave home and there's still the 2 of you left at home. The presence of an authority with a stable ruling system that's consistently acted upon. This would be the ideal family scenario, but I know families because I live in one. It's a presence of an authority. We know that one of the signs of the end of time is that the child will become the master. The child will become the master. Okay? The child then asserts the authority over the parent and becomes their master. I see it all the time. All the time. Okay? And this is a problem. So the parent is the authority over the child. And consistently to have a stable ruling system. It's all very, when your children go into class next year, they go from grade 1 to grade 2 or year 7 to year 8, their new teachers will, in the very first session, say, here are my rules. If you don't follow them, these are the consequences. And they do that in the first week to set the ground rules for how they're to interact with their new teacher. But as parents, we forget to do that. Often we make up the rules as we go, and then we wonder why our children don't agree with us or get annoyed, because we're making them up as we go. And parenting across different developmental stages means that the rules have to shift. Your rules have to shift. Otherwise, if they don't shift, you'll see conflict. So when parents come to me and say, my teenager is always arguing with me, it's, well, you need to look at, your rules need to shift. Because if they're not working, it's not to say that let go of the rule, but have a look at whether they need to shift. Okay? Because our children, they're 12 one day and 16 the next day. And if our rules are the same, you're going to see conflict, or you're going to see an emotional consequence in your child. Consistently. Consistent is the word. Okay, when we try and adopt anything new, when we establish a new habit, we need consistency with it. If you said, right, well, I'm gonna start exercising this week, and then you exercise for 1 week and then you stop, you're just not going to get the fitness results that you want. Okay? If you put petrol in the car this week and not next week, the car will stop. When we try and shift anything in our parenting, if you do it 1 week and then not the next, you're not going to get the result you want. And it's the hardest thing for parents to do. The hardest thing for parents to do, but where they do it, you get the result. So for example, if you're very strict about seatbelts on your children in the car, then your children will, after some time, automatically put their seatbelt on and you haven't asked. They just automatically do it. They know because you've been firm for when they were little, and then they almost feel uncomfortable. Like when my children, we went to Malaysia recently, no seatbelts, anyway, and my kids, they're 3 and 6 and 15, are freaking out that they're not wearing a seatbelt, and they're like, where's the seatbelt? Where's the seatbelt? We're like, relax, it's Malaysia, there's no seatbelts. Okay. So consistent. And I'll come and give you expectations. You know, there's a concept of the family as the team. So when my 6-year-old, if I ask him to set the table at night, and he goes, why do I have to do it? Because you're a team player. You're part of the team. Okay? And I use it with my 15-year-old too. Because there's no other reason why they should do it. Except that, well, I said, so do it. Okay. But to give them the concept of the team, you're part of the team, everyone chips in, everyone helps, you're part of the team. And they can't get away from that because they want to be part of the team. Having a family identity. I think we've lost this over time. I think families once upon a time were known for something. I was at my parents' house last night and dinner, and my grandfather, when he was alive, he went to Ireland, because I have an Irish-English heritage, and he got a definition sort of our name and what the family going back to like 635 AD or something, you know, were known for. Families, like your own families, have traditions and they're known for something. And I think we lose that. Or I think, what are we known for now? The family that has a host of BMWs. You know, the family of doctors, maybe, well, that's a good one. But I think it needs to go deeper than that. You need to create an identity about your family so your children feel part of that. Often we see, one child sort of going in a different direction. They don't feel part of the team. There's nothing to identify with. So think about how you can create an identity for your family. We're known for this, but it has to be inclusive. Because if you've got the 3 children who are all A students, and then you've got the one child who, for whatever reason, struggles with academia, then to say we're the straight A family is going to exclude the child. And children will look for that. They will unconsciously look at how they belong to you in some way, more than just lineage. And this is where it comes to individual goals being supported. So for instance, you could broaden your identity by saying, we're the family we're the contributors to the community. We might do really well in school or we might do average, but regardless, we're the contributors to the community. Okay? Or we're the educators in the community. And when you do this, it's been linked to positive wellbeing and resilience and a stronger purpose for life when the purpose comes from the family. Because remember, young people, that's one of the tasks they struggle with is what is their purpose? What are they here for? They question, it's at that time they question, and rightly so, religion and what they believe in, and they question your values. That's what their brain is allowing them to do in their adolescence. So where you give them a definition, that you make it easier for them. And another last point is that, a problem that I see all the time, particularly when it comes to, I see a lot of middle children. Anyone here a middle child? No, yeah, a few hands around. I see a lot of middle children, in my clinic, and often because it's the child that gets compared to. They're not the baby anymore, but they're not as mature and responsible as their elder sibling. So where possible, you compare each children against their own best, not each other, or not your cousins are doing this. It doesn't necessarily foster motivation, it fosters low self-esteem. Let's have a look. There's, how many of you in here have adolescents? You have teenagers? Right. Okay, good, that's more than half the group. So let me talk to you a little bit about the different stages in very simple terms. So early adolescence, characterised now, we call it the tweenie stage. Tweens represents sort of your grade 5 student right up to your year 7 student, maybe even year 8. Okay? They maybe haven't hit They haven't hit puberty yet, but they're on their way. Now, because of this is a fact actually, because of the amount of plastics that are in our society, what's happening to teenagers or the onset of kids worldwide is that their bodies are developing quicker than their minds. Their bodies are developing quicker than their minds, which means they grow up and they grow out, and you then expect them to treat them like an adult, but they are nowhere near it because there's a brain lag there. And it's completely connected. So we see an onset of puberty for both males and females across the world earlier than we've ever seen before, and is completely and directly related to the amount of what's called phthalates. It's a chemical in a plastic that gets released into our foods and in our water. Okay? And it's higher in countries where there's a higher dependence on plastic. Okay? So we're talking, and what we're seeing now is kids who are physically bigger and think that they can make bigger decisions, but they can't. Okay, so there's a lack of common sense there. This is a concern. And very little we can do except shelter our kids from plastics, exposure to plastics, in terms of seepage into foods. And that's predominantly why, for the mums in here who might know BPA free, it's getting rid of, there was a whole, and Australia's really lagging behind other countries, but we need to be careful about what we're feeding our kids, because it does have an impact on their natural development. But the early phase of development in adolescence is really, am I normal? Remember, their bodies change, everything changes. I'll just quickly go to the next slide to show you. So we, check body, and some of us are so far away from puberty, it happened such a long time ago, we forget what impact it had on our brain and our emotions and our bodies. Okay, except we have resulted who we are now. But I think this is a really confusing time. There is no other timing except in adolescence where the brain restructures, it physically rewires. In boys, we see that they become very, not only not motivated, they sleep a long period of time and they can become very clumsy and uncoordinated. And in girls, well, girls have to control the use of their tongue. That's how it works. The boys have to control their use of physicality. If you're going to look at this, two things that young people, both men and women, have to accomplish in that stage is, as I said, women have to, because we have more connections between emotion and language, our task is to control the use of our tongue because it can be sharp. Boys, it's the use of, because of testosterone and the release that makes them grow up and out, and increase muscle, that they have to watch their use of physicality, their use of force. Middle teenage years, then after, their body might have settled down a little bit in terms of growth, although it's still growing, but then there's the who am I identity. And this is where we see a lot of young people questioning their belief system, questioning the belief system that they're being given from home, comparing it to the belief systems of their friends, of society, what's being shown in the media. Who am I? And there's a task which we'll do in just a moment, which is a strength activity which will help children to answer this so that they find their feet. And late adolescence is where am I going? So year 10 to year 12, really year 10 to even second year uni, it's where am I off to? Where am I going? What are my next steps? There's a lot of pressures. We have to moderate the pressure we put on young people because they are young. And I hear it all the time from young people going, I don't have to decide what I've got to do for the rest of my life. Like, I'm so young. And that's the truth. That in many respects, I don't feel ready to have to make that decision, which is why we then see such a high dropout rate at university. Okay, even the private colleges they were looking at some statistics a few years ago, and even a private school like Halbury, which is a private school been around for decades, 30% of their year 12s dropped out of uni. 30% dropped out. The parents who were obviously paying astronomical fees for that university were saying, hang on a minute, what's happening here? Why is such a high rate just dropping out? Well, because they're being trained to be academic and to get the marks to get in, but not necessarily is there an alignment with who they are. And who are they getting in for? Are they getting into the degrees for their parents? Are they getting into the degree for the teachers? And the same could be said for Islamic schools across Melbourne as well. And then we see that kids aren't happy getting into the courses that they're in. And what we would hope to see is either a deferment or a transfer over into a course that they want, rather than a complete withdrawal that, okay, uni's not for me. So it's where am I going? I think we can really help kids along the way by helping them to get the second stage of middle, who am I? right. If you get who am I right, then you don't have to worry about stage 3. Stage 3 will take care of itself. But for getting the who am I, and let's face it, most of us sometimes still ask ourselves that question. It is something that evolves over time. But I'm going to teach you a really effective way to start the process. Now, I'm going to talk about the who am I stage. How long have I got to? Just so I know. 15?
15.
15?
Yeah.
Is that including questions or not including?
Not excluding.
Not including? Okay, good, thank you. Okay, here's the thing. Who have you told your team they are? Who have you told them they are? So if a parent brings a child to me in clinic, and I always fear it when when a parent brings a teenager into my clinic and wants to come into the session to tell me everything that's wrong with their child. So I want you to think for a moment what that feels like. The parent brings the child in, and this isn't, you don't have to come to see a psychologist for this to happen. This can be to an uncle or to the mum's complaining, to the dad while the child's in the room about the child, and the child sits there and listens to that. And you're telling them who they are, rather than who you want them to be instead. The exchange, if we were to script down everything the exchange is on a daily basis between parents and children, and teenagers in particular, that the child on average, that teenager on average hears one positive comment to 13 negative comments. So they receive one positive comment to every 13 negative ones. So who have you told your team that they are? What, you want them to catch that one positive comment and inflate that? It's unlikely. If our bosses were coming to us and telling us 13 negative comments and one positive, you know how we feel about that boss. So how we describe our children when they are present is the child you're going to get. Okay? So if you say, so I brought my child today and they're really, really shy. They're really shy, they need to snap out of it. The child goes, okay, I'm shy. Rebellious, naughty, bad, evil, or any other negative descriptor that you could insert. Describe a few. Where possible, never insult a child's character or person. Identify the behaviour, even from when they're really little. You cannot be happy with their behaviour, but try not to express that you're not happy with them as a person or as an individual. You're not happy with their behaviour. So then redirect the behaviour, rather than making it about a characteristic in that child. If you tell a teenager that they're lazy, they will be. Yeah, but you said I'm lazy. So here you go, I'm not doing my homework, I'm not helping out. Then you're going to have to use force to get them to do what you want. Redirect the behaviour and model what you want to see. I think parents forget that. And that's understandable. I'm a parent too, and I'm not standing here saying I'm perfect. But it's about tweaking our parenting so we get more of what we want and less of what we don't want. An example, you can't grow plants without sunlight, and you can't grow people without words of love, respect, affection, and respect. I've said it twice. Yeah. I say this a lot to young people. I had a young person recently, there could have been some issues with her, and she said, I'm going to give you a strength assessment in a moment. She said, is rebellious a strength? I'm like, this will be interesting. And so when we look at strengths, when we think our children are perceived showing us a weakness, there is a strength behind that weakness, but they're showing too much of the strength. So have a think about what's the strength behind rebellion. What's the strength behind rebellion? Determination. Strong will. Firm. Assertive. Independent. There's quite a lot, isn't there? So we want them to be that. We don't want them to be rebellious. Okay? In the same way that your teenage son might be the clown in the class. He might, as in he's the one that likes to draw attention, so what's the strength behind that? He might be humorous is the strength, but he's not learning the right context to demonstrate the strength. So it's about context. So rather than making the child bad for being humorous, we just say, love your humour, wrong context. Be funny here. Be funny here. Don't be funny there. Okay. So the child still is allowed to grow and develop their characteristic without being shut down and front and centre with who they are. And then we wonder why our kids are confused about who they are, because we keep shutting down who they are. But we're not realising that their weakness is a strength. Like my 3-year-old, her strength is curiosity. What that turns out to be like a 3-year-old is pulling apart everything, getting into every cupboard. Okay. Constantly active, looking for stuff, looking to learn. Curiosity is her strength, of which I have to remind myself when I have to constantly pull apart as she explores the house. So remind kids to be, or teenagers to be, the best parts of themselves as constantly as possible. There's different versions of ourselves. So you go, that's not the version I really want to see. I really want to see this version of you. And that shows them that showing their strengths is possible. This is what they're competing against. If negativity starts at home, it's very easy for it to continue outside your front door. Okay, from kids on the street to, they're already competing with their siblings anyway, and getting negativity from their siblings or cousins, friends, teachers, media, the society at large. So it's very easy for kids to, when they're thinking about who they are, to draw on what I call like rubbish files. And we have files full of negative beliefs about ourselves. So when we want children to be the best version of themselves, they don't know that yet. You have to teach them who they are, the better version of themselves. So in adolescence, we have to survive putting up with put-downs, criticisms, insults, teasing, negative remarks. And we enter adulthood bruised and sometimes scarred from the negativity. So we don't think we're worthy of getting that job promotion, or from getting a property, or from achieving some success internationally, or making some impact on the world at large, actually. Most young people don't think they can make an impact on the world because of them harbouring and thinking about their negative beliefs. So helping your children to answer the question, who am I? Is a really important question. What are your child's strengths? I was talking about it with some of the sisters just before we started. The concept of strengths is really important, because if I got any one of you up right now to say and ask you that question, I can tell, and I won't do it because I don't have time, but many of you would not give me more than 5 strengths. So 5 positive characteristics or attributes about yourself. You just wouldn't, for a few reasons. One is humility. It doesn't matter internationally, universally, most people are not taught to celebrate the positive attributes of themselves. They're not taught to celebrate it publicly. One. The other one is a strength vocabulary. We often aren't taught the words, the characteristics, to define ourselves or identify ourselves as good in any way, which is why people struggle to only give me a couple of words. Think about what are your strengths, and where is the only place you ever get asked that question? A job interview. And when people get asked that question in a job interview, they never answer it well, in my experience as an employer. They will tell me what they're good at according to their skills, not their characteristics. But you know what, when I get 2 resumes that look almost identical because people have done the same degree, have gone to similar universities, have the same qualifications, or the same registrations, what separates them is who they are. So if I have someone in front of me who can't tell me who they are, then I don't know if they're reliable or responsible. They could have a degree, but are you reliable? Are you going to show up on time? Are you responsible? Do you show initiative? Are you creative, innovative, honest? All of the qualities that I want to see in an employee. But you have to teach kids to say that about themselves for life, because life is one big job interview. So as soon as young people have this, which most people don't, and we grow up into adults who still don't have it, is that we really don't know then why we're here. Because all of us have have been blessed with a very unique matrix of strengths, of characteristics that makes up who we are and why we're here. It then points the way forward for what you're to do while you're here. What you're to do. So in front, on your tables, I've given you, can I just grab one? On your tables, I've given you what's called, I call it a strength assessment. Okay, I hope they're writing down a copy. Now this is, if we just look up here a little bit, there's a little diagram up the front. And basically there's some negative little signs around feeling negative. So if we're constantly harnessing those negative files about who we are or who we've been told we are, then essentially we're going to feel negative. We're going to probably have a poor attitude about ourselves. That will impact on our motivation and our achievement. And it's not that everyone is all negative, by the way. Someone might be able to say, oh, well, I have one thing. But overall, that's not going to shift an outcome in terms of their life. What we want is the reverse. We don't want people to achieve an arrogance that they're all perfect, let's face it. Okay. But that's not usually the case because so many people cannot find any of their strengths anyway. And we want them to feel good about themselves to help them to achieve their own change. But what I've provided here is a strength vocabulary. It's what's missing, and it's only a really brief one. And of course, and there's actually strengths in different languages too. So as much as I've provided it in English, there are culturally influenced strengths that come through your own languages. And so I want you to think about that too in terms of how you use those words with your children. So I've provided some. So let's have a look. So what I usually get people to do, and don't fill this in for yourself as much as some of you might have, take this, and if you don't have children, fill it in for yourself. If you have children, take a photocopy and do one for all of your children, or predominantly get them to do it. Even if they're a child, help them to do it. Explain the words, and don't influence it with your non-verbal language. Like a child says, I'm honest, and you go, don't influence them with non-verbal language. You want to see how they see themselves. We want to see how they see themselves. And I've given my 15-year-old this about 5 times, I think, over the course of her life. And she probably still keeps coming back to some strengths. So what does she have? A good sense of herself, who she is. See, skill sets only take you to a particular avenue. Okay? Like having maths as a subject, you could be fantastic in it, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be, a grade something else or in another context. It's very contextual. Characteristics take you everywhere. They will bring you the world. But skill sets are very contextual. So this is characteristics. Now here's the thing about this. What I do is I have 2 things. One is I get them to tick if it's like you, tick like you. If it's not like you, tick not like you. If it's sometimes like you, then put a tick in the like you column. Okay. So it's sometimes, don't put it in the middle, just put it in the like you column. The second component is then circle, I've said tick there, but circle your top 5. So there's lots of research around the use of signature strengths, its correlation with success, happiness, health, well-being. When we can identify our top 5, okay, so say for instance one in my top 5, which is creative. If I actualise creativity in my daily life, I'm healthier and happier. It resonates with my soul. I'm doing exactly what I know that I'm meant to be here for. If I stop using creativity, or if there's a gap in time between the use of my creativity, I might become sad or demotivated, even to the point of unwell. And so if we look at the experience of depression tells us we're miles away from what we need. So what do we need to do? We need to be being who we are and using our strengths. And our strengths aren't just for us. So this isn't an arrogance activity. Our strengths are for contribution. Our strengths are always for other people. Ultimately, we are a big beneficiary of it. But our strengths are for other people. Hence our role as Khalifa, representatives. Our role is for other people. So using your top 5. Now, what's interesting about the top 5 is in a child or an adolescent telling you the top 5 strengths, they're also telling you the top 5 weaknesses. Even if when you do it yourselves, which I highly recommend you do, including husband and wife, it's a really good activity to do, okay, because you complement each other, but it's important to understand who each other sees each other as, because there could be assets in your spouse you're not harnessing as a team, or assets in your children that you're not harnessing because you never saw it before. So let's have a look. So I'll just go through a couple in terms of how they will develop as a weakness. So when we see problems in our children, we're really looking at a character that's been used too much. Okay. Cautious. If you're taught too cautious, you're worried. Okay, you're a warrior. It can go that far. Cautious is a strength, worried is not. Courageous or brave. Too much of that means you're a risk taker. You can be a risk taker, you can put yourself in danger if you're too courageous, or you can put others in danger. So you can be a risk taker, and you can be a risk taker in business, or you can be a risk taker on the side of a mountain. Either way, it may not serve you well. Organised. Someone who's ultra organised is also known as very controlling. Or even to the point at home around being obsessed about things being in their place. So organised is good, controlling is not. Caring. You identify yourself as caring. The vulnerability behind that is you will give your health and wealth to other people, and you'll leave nothing for yourself, and you'll become unwell. And I see this in particularly lots of women and some men too. Is you give because you're caring, you see yourself as caring, that's who you are, but you don't save it as self, you don't save any energy for yourself and your own health and well-being. So what will happen? You'll experience burnout, compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is caring too much. Okay, so they're just some examples. So I'm going to hand it over now for questions. I could go on for another 3 hours, you can probably guess that, but I won't. So I'll hand it over for questions, and I'll put through the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's quite explanatory, and it'll give you some other ideas around setting boundaries for kids, but we're at the time, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Monique, for a very informative presentation. We do have some time for questions. What I would ask you is, you can ask the question from the floor. You have a piece of paper, you can actually ask your question, someone can come around and can collect it, and you can do that. In the meantime, also what I would ask you is, we have every table has got a survey form. Would request you to circle, so there's a set of 7 questions, and would request you to circle the answer as to what you think, and we will take it back, collate it during the break, and come back and present the stats in the end. So while we do that, and I would ask if there are any questions from the floor. I can actually start with a question that was asked to me to ask you, and I'll read. So you mentioned patience and learning to say no to your children. What about a person who's already being exploited by his child? And what are the options to correct it now? And on the other side, what are his options as well? So the other way around. So the parent's option to correct it, and his options to correct it. Yeah.
I'm going to flick through to a slide. I've got a slide that answers this. So you can see, okay, this is one. This answers this. So here we have a farm. I didn't get up to this, but that's time for you. One of the boundaries is what we need for the children. Our child, when they're in the womb of a mother, is in a boundary, it's safe and secure. It has limits. There's a limit. Okay, the womb is a limit. Okay, the child comes out, the child's in, the parent's arm. The arm is the limit. It's the boundary that the child knows, the child needs it. Without the boundary, the child drops on the floor. That's unfortunate and unhelpful to the child. Okay, so we keep the child safe and secure. The child gets heavy though, so then we've got to put them down on the ground. And we have to start setting limits in words as much as the child understands it. And we say 2 words to children: yes and no. Yes and no. They start setting the limits for children. Okay, and they help us to establish that ruling system that I was talking to you about. The child needs to know the ruling system, but also the consequences, or what's the accountability. And one dollar sets us up in the same way. Okay, if you do well and you adhere to the ruling system, things will go very well for you in this life and the next. If you don't, if you choose to not do things well in this life, there'll be a consequence for you here and hereafter. In the exact same way, we set up parenting in exactly the same structure. Okay, so we have a guide that says rules, consequences. In a household, we do the same thing, but we do it in an age-appropriate way. We set up a ruling system, but we set up consequences. What undermines a parent's ability to convey that to the point that a child becomes manipulative is we might be setting rules, but not setting any consequences. So I see parents come to me all the time saying, my child just won't listen. Well, what's the consequence? Nothing. I just tell them off. Or I tell them not to do that. So it's not really working, is it? Why? Because telling them off or talking to them sometimes isn't the consequence. There's no accountability. So it's much more important for a child to lose things like privileges, like no TV, no iPod, no iPad, no iPhone, no any other IOE, Xbox, etc., or other things, and take it away for short amounts of time. Okay, if you take it away from a month because they haven't set the dish, set the table, then what are you going to do if they wag school? Take it off them for 5 years. So parents often will set inappropriate consequences that are too big, so then the child learns to do without the item anyway, and you've just lost your reinforcer. And I say a reinforcer. If it's not working, it's not a reinforcer. Okay, as in positive or negative. And so we can guide children's behaviour in two ways. One is we say, if you do, do really well, and you adhere to the rule over a certain amount of days, there'll be a small reward on Friday night. We'll have games night, or we'll go out as a family or something, or I'll take you to the park. It needs to be very small. Don't go big. Don't go, I'm going to buy you an Xbox or something because they've set the table, or because they've done something. Again, you've got nowhere to go. What a car next. So some parents get a little bit skewed in terms of the amounts. Okay, so always go small. Start small, because otherwise what children are doing, right, so if I do this, will you give me $20? And then you're paying for their good behaviour. But positive reinforcement is not meant to be like that. We introduce it when they're younger, but then we start to pull it back, and we start to give other, like, you know what, I really need some extra help this week with the housework, or with working in the garage, or whatever it might be, or in the business, and if you help me out with this, like we'll do something that you know is going to be a reinforcer. And it's more likely to be time spent with you than $20. Or although a teenager will say, how much are you paying me per hour to do this? Yeah. And there's some merit in that too. Some merit. But sometimes it might be, well, because you love me. That's why you can do it. So what can the child do? You have to help the child to understand the rules and the consequences. If they don't know, it's actually unfair to introduce the consequence. Okay? It's like, this government introducing rules retrospectively. It's like, I'm just telling you, that you're being punished for something and now here's a rule. But you did that last week and that wasn't the rule, you didn't know. So it's a little bit unfair. So help your kids to know, even if you've got it on fridges, on your fridge or that type of thing, like these are your things. And you do need to look at this developmentally. So it's going to be different from a 5-year-old to an 8-year-old to a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, even to the 19-year-old who at that time needs to be contributing to the household. Because their contribution in the household will then reflect who they become as a person. Yeah. Any other? Sorry. The picture. You're the fence. You're the fence. You're the boundary. Okay. You're the boundary. You're the fence line. Who's gonna? Sorry, I'm just gonna add in. The first person to escape, or the first animal to escape, if you're not there, if that fence is not there, is donkey. Donkey doesn't realise that there's a big freeway on the other side of the fence. If donkey gets out of the fence, he's going to get hit by the truck. Not helpful. So sometimes we think that by implementing a fence which represents our no, that we might be holding kids back, or maybe we're a bad parent if we say no here. So when parents don't say no, it's because they over-empathise with their children. Okay? When they don't say no, you're over-empathising. You're feeling their emotion too much. You're feeling that their disappointment or their sadness or their anxiety or their anger, and then you cave and give in. Okay. And that can be the case more for mums than sometimes dads. Dads are pretty further, but that's why you need each other. Because sometimes dads can implement a boundary that's way too constrictive. and that suffocates. Like if we were trying to shove the dog in, there's another boundary there, which is, okay, the chook house up in the top corner, we would try and shove the donkey in the chook house, the donkey's going to get, it's going to be painful. So that's what we have to modify our parenting as we go, otherwise we can be too suffocating. No boundary whatsoever leads to, the too much freedom that they're not responsible enough to handle. So just think about being the fence. The other thing is to say no is to love. For parents who find that difficult to sometimes say no to their kids, to say no is to love. In saying no, from when children are little, we teach them to say no to themselves. Like, no, I can't have that third Tim Tam. One is enough. Things like that. Like, no, I can't spend all my money. I need to save some of it for Sadaqah, some of it, for, something else and, for a specific goal and a bit goes into my savings. So this is where it turns into, because the huge consequences is that we see adults who have manifest a whole variety of issues because they can't say no to themselves, or they feel like they can say no to other people and control other people when they shouldn't be doing that either.
Can you please also circle the survey questions, and we need to hand it over to, while you will have refreshments, to the admin person there who just want to coordinate. Thank you.
I've got a question here. We've said no since they were little. Now they said that they're big enough. Of course they're big enough. They think they're big enough. That's young people. And understand everything. I guess it's the know-all syndrome. They want more freedom to discover the world, so what should I do? I think this is where you have conversations about what it is that they want to discover in the world. I think what I see, I had a mum say, a difference in parenting between a husband and wife was the child's 10 years old. The dad says, he can go to the park with his friends, he'll be fine. The mum says, no, that's dangerous. He's too young. And so I think you've really got to know your child, because you could have different children, and at 10, one's actually really responsible. The park's within, around the corner, they're with friends, so there's safety in numbers, etc., and they're well safe enough to go to this park, okay, and depending on the area you live in. But then you might have the 10-year-old who actually, you determine is actually being really irresponsible or too much of a risk taker, and you fear that they might get up to no good or that type of thing, and then so that might be a no for that child. So you've got to know your child well. But again, with the strengths, sometimes we have to give children a bit of rope, as they say, not enough to hang themselves, but enough to go out and explore and still feel safely tied to you. I think that's important because we want to create independent, responsible young people. But again, this is up to you and your family to discuss. But sometimes we can create pseudo opportunities for parents who are too anxious. Let's face it, what usually prevents a parent from not giving their child enough freedom is anxiety, and that's the parent's anxiety. It's not the child's anxiety. But what we can be inadvertently teaching children is the world's a dangerous place, you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything, as opposed to putting the responsibility on the child to make the right decision. So you have to look at, is it your anxiety, your own irrational fear, or is there actually something, a characteristic in your child which common sense tells you, don't give the child this level of freedom just yet. How do we make our family not boring for our teenage child? Ask your teenage child. I think we've got to start to, if we spend time with our kids, we generally get a sense of what they find fun, and if you don't know that answer, then that's a really good conversation to have. Is imagine that you have dinner with your family one night, and you go, and you're the one to say, it's so boring being in this family. What can we do that's fun? And they're more than likely will have already brainstormed and written down a list for you, or you can go and get them to Google it. So like what I do with my kids over the holidays. What do you want to do on the holidays? I don't know. Go look it up on Google and bring us a list. How do we become the oak tree for the child and not the other way around? Be firm and polite and establish boundaries. There's a very good book which I always reference. It's called Boundaries with Kids. Boundaries with Kids. And it's written by Townsend and Cloud. So Townsend and Cloud. Now, They're two, I'm warning you in advance, they're two American Christian psychologists that have written the book. The reason that I still highly recommend it is because they use God concept through the book. So in terms of helping children to be virtuous and God-fearing and God-knowing, and they use God concept, and at this time there's no Islamic alternative that talks about boundaries in the same excellent way they do. And so, you know, when we read books like that, you take and leave what you want, you know, that's culturally sensitive or appropriate for yourselves. But it is an excellent book because there's God concept all the way through. There's some biblical references, but the biblical references, from my understanding, are very in line with what Islam says anyway, because it's a biblical book. So, you know, as I said, read it with, you know, open eyes. But I think you'll derive a lot of benefit from it. And that will help you to establish boundaries across different age groups. Any questions from the floor? Sorry, any questions from the floor?
Those up on the floor.
Yeah, any other questions that people have thought about off the top of their head? No? Okay, I'll just try and read this one. Okay, so you've touched on a point on children growing too fast, as in their body developing faster than their brain or their maturity, is what I meant. And living in a country that makes plastic. Well, every country is affected by this, it's just the rates are more than other countries. Australia's not one of the highest rates. So, okay, let me explain the impact. The chemical phthalate in plastics gets released into food. So, say for instance, bottled water. Okay, we leave a bottle of water in the sun, phthalate will leach into the water, we drink the water. And so countries that have a high dependence on plastics will have a higher level of this in their body. Now what phthalates does to the body, it mimics a chemical that triggers the endocrine system to start puberty, to kickstart puberty. Okay. So it mimics a chemical that triggers endocrine system to start puberty, even at 6 years old. In some countries, 6, 9, but even in Australia we're seeing, you know, kids developing faster. Then they think that they're ready to take on the world much earlier than what they actually are. Because even though they have physically matured in terms of growing up and out, the brain rewiring hasn't completed yet. Certainly not for a 6, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old. So it's really interesting because then we have to question even Islamically, when's puberty? Is puberty a the physical onset of puberty, or is it the psychological? When there's never been a time that we've been impacted by this in humanity, where there's a difference in physical maturity versus psychological maturity. And we see a lot of young people taking risks and doing silly things because they think that their body is ready to do so, and they are not. Does that explain that question a little bit? So what can we do about it? Well, it's going to be different in different countries. Reduce the amount of plastics that you use in your home. Keeping things like drinks and that type of thing in glass or ceramic, not plastics. But certain countries are making these chemicals illegal to be. So across Europe, they've been illegal for a very long time because they've had the research well before Australia. Australia's only been BPA free for probably the last 5 years. So they're making changes, but again, there's so many plastics that we use that have been sitting in our cupboards for even 10 years. There could be leaching chemicals that are impacting on this for our children. So what can we do? Use glass, use ceramics, use aluminium as opposed to plastic. Any other questions?
We have a question from the floor by SMS. We had a child in our late 50s and our child finds it difficult to connect with us. Please give us some advice or techniques we can improve our influence on him.
How old's the child? You're not sure? Okay. I'll be assuming that they're over 10 or around there. Okay. That's an interesting one. I think because of it all depends on the quality of conversations. You're by default of the age of the parent are likely to raise quite a mature, responsible child. It also depends if there's other siblings in the context of your family who can act as conduits between your child's generation and your generation. We see this anyway, even between, it doesn't matter whether there's, say, 20 years between a parent and 50, we still see that there's intergenerational difficulties. But talking to your children, your children are the experts on their life in terms of what's going on for them. So being, open, but again, sometimes there can be limitations on our physical health, even as a close to 40-year-old. You're not parenting as a 20-year-old, so there can be differences. But then we can link up our children with sporting clubs or other type of youth group activities where they're hanging around other people their age in an environment that we semi-control. And the type of conversations that you have are probably going to be full of wisdom. Your child, even though you may not be connected with your child right now, they will connect with you at a greater level when they're a little bit older to do so and appreciate your wisdom at that because of your lived years. So I think I'll finish. I want to go over to time. If people have any really burning questions, I will leave some cards, some business cards on the table at the front for anyone to come and get after the session today because I have to run. But just like, okay, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and sorry I haven't been able to get through more in the hour. I've got one last question. If you had a chance to raise your kids again, how differently would you do that? That's a really good question. I think we'd all probably do it over again. But even if we were to do it over again, our first child is what we call the guinea pig. It's our experiment. That's unfortunate. I am the first child in my family, but they're our experiment, and hopefully we try and get better. The truth is, most of us relax in our parenting, as in we relax in our roles. So by the last child, you're just like, they practically raise themselves or by their siblings, but then they need you to. By then you become usually the person you need to become. All I can say is one of the most important things I'll mention today is to do the strength assessment with your children. I think I've seen this, I use this with every person that walks through my clinic door and in all of my workshops, because for the 20 years I've been working, this has an impact on people's lives when you keep going back to this. Because these are your resources. I see them, these are your God-given resources, and when we feel alone and when we face problems, we go back to what we already have, what we've already been given, so we never feel like we're helpless in any situation. And at the end of the day, if someone says something nasty to us, we go back to who we are, and then we can be resilient and bounce back quicker. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. It's fine.
Thank you so much for a very great presentation, and hopefully everyone has benefited from this. We'd like to thank her for attending today. And just as I said before, all the details, she's got a business class there as well. But all the details can be found on her website, and we'll put up the website at the end of today as well for you to go on. She's got all the blogs and podcasts, videos on there as well, if anyone would like to have a look at that. So she has to run. We'll continue with the content, but we thank her for coming today. And if we can, for her, recite a loud salawat. And with this, we will have a short break, so just for 5 to 10 minutes. There's tea and cakes outside. If anyone wants, they can go and get it, and please come back here. We have only 5-10 minutes, so we'll continue inshallah after this with Monana's speech and then a question and answer. Also, just a reminder, we've got a survey on the table. We'll be collecting that now, and we'll bring the results together and present them